Story time. Would you call this cheating? So a little background information. I was 16 and a sophomore in high school, and I was dating this guy who we're gonna call Tom, right? When we started dating, everything was super good. But a little bit into our relationship, I started to get the ick. Anything and everything he would do would literally irritate the hell out of me. So at that point, I told him that we should take a break. So we did. Well, while we were on this little break, I decided to go out with my cousin the one night. And she had brought this guy who she was talking to at the time. We're gonna call him Jake. Jake and I had the same classes in school, but we never really talked to each other. Well, I started to get to know him throughout the night, and I realized we had a lot in common. I felt like he was flirting with me, so I decided to flirt with him. When we got home, I had told her how much I really liked Jake. We ended up FaceTiming and falling asleep on the phone together. We all hung out again the next day, and I invited him back to my house. Like for part 2. Would you consider this cheating? Part 2. So like I said, we all decided to hang out again the next day. It was really cold out, so I invited everybody back to my house. And when we got back to my house, we were watching horror films. And I was cuddling next to Jake on the couch. And listen, I wanted to kiss him really bad, but Tom and I had just gotten done with our so-called break. So I decided to be loyal and not do that. Well, a few days after Jake and I talking, I realized that I wanted to be with him and not Tom. So I decided to end things with Tom, and now Jake and I have been together for 1 year and 2 months, and we couldn't be happier. But every time that we bring up Tom, Jake always tells me that I cheated on him. Would you consider what I did cheating? Story time about how my boyfriend and best friend were sneaking around behind my back. So a little background information, I was 15 and in 10th grade. So my mom and dad were split up, and I was pretty much allowed to do whatever I wanted because of that. So I was dating this boy named Jacob. Well, my best friend Alice literally hated him. Like low-key, every once in a while, she would try to break him and I up. And when I would call her out on it, she would just deny it. Anyway, so the one day I didn't go to school because I was super sick. So the whole day I was trying to text Jacob and Allison, but nobody was answering me. Which was extremely weird because no matter what, Allison would always text me back. So after I knew the school ended, I went to Allison's house. Nobody was answering the door, so I used the spare key. I walk in and all I hear is a very loud banging coming from her bedroom. So I walk in, I see my boyfriend and her together, and then he starts saying that she drugged him. So I went on his phone, I see a bunch of old text messages between him and her, and them exchanging pictures. And then sis wants to start giving me an attitude, so I punched her in the face. And then I left and I don't talk to either. Story time about my toxic ex-boyfriend that I met in therapy. Little background information. I was a part of this therapy group where you would go every week and talk about your feelings. Well, I saw this really cute kid, so I wrote down my Snapchat and gave it to him. He added me back, and then we started dating like a week later. And for the first 2 or 3 months, everything was going smooth. And then he became really toxic and controlling. Like, he would always go through my phone. And any guy that I had a streak with, he would accuse me of cheating on him with them. And it got to the point where he was literally so clingy. Like every second of every day he wanted to FaceTime, he had to be talking to me. I had to have my location on. And I would explain to him that I needed my space, but he literally just did not get the hint. So by this point, we were literally on and off all the time. And anytime that I broke up with him, I would block him because I didn't want to think about him. But he started calling my parents and complaining about me. So they blocked him. And then he tried being friends with my brother to get to me. Extremely toxic best friend part 2. So pretty much her excuse for that was, oh, well, he said that he was gonna leak my nudes if I didn't send him them again. Which was a lie because literally half the school already had her nudes. So then I started talking to this other boy, and he lived like right down the street from her. So she was like, if you want to go to his house, you can. And I was like, are you sure? And she said, yeah, just go tell my mom. And I was like, oh, okay. So I went and told her mom where I was going and went over his house. So I walked back to her house and she literally locked me out. Like her mom had to come open the door for me to let me in. And she was like, oh, it's a good thing you came back when you did. Because I was going to drive you home now and tell your dad everything that you did. And she goes, I don't think you guys should be together because you're unexperienced. And she would always tell me how he flirts with her all the time. So after our friendship ended, she goes, I just felt like it was always a competition between me and you. Crazy story time about how I found my aunt and my boyfriend hooking up at a family function. So every year, my mom and stepdad would have a Christmas party, and everyone from both sides of the family would come. And I also invited my boyfriend. And at this time, my boyfriend and I were both juniors in high school. So everybody came to the party and everything was going good. Well, like an hour into the party, all the adults were super drunk. So before we all open gifts, I decided to help my mom clean up dinner. So while I'm washing the dishes, I look over and my aunt and boyfriend are talking a lot. And she started to get really touchy with him, but I didn't think anything of it because she was super drunk. So after I'm done cleaning up, we all start opening gifts. And my boyfriend goes up to my room to go get his phone off the charger. And after he went upstairs, my aunt was like, "Oh, I need to go throw up." So about 10 minutes goes past and my boyfriend's still up in the room grabbing his phone, so I went to check on him. And I walk upstairs to see my aunt and my boyfriend laying on my bed making out. Like for part 2. Part 2 to how I caught my aunt and my boyfriend hooking up at a family function. So like I said, they are laying on my bed making out. Doors wide open, they don't even bother to shut the door. And both of their shirts are off. And I think I should just put in here, my aunt is like 28. She's on my stepdad's side. She's really young. So they look up and my aunt's just like drunk as fuck looking at me. And she's like, "Do you want to join?" Like, bitch, what the fuck? So I'm just like shook and I start screaming. Everybody rushes up the stairs and my mom pushes me out of the way and sees my boyfriend and my aunt laying on my bed with their shirts off. So my mom starts screaming at everybody. So my mom calls the cops, says that an adult is touching an underage boy, and she calls his mom, tells her what happened. So my boyfriend and I broke up, so that spread around the whole school, and word got out that they actually started seeing each other. Story time about my worst trip off LSD. So one of the kids in my friend group was about to leave for Arizona. And we would always talk about how we need to trip together before he leaves. And anytime that I would trip off acid, I would go to my one plug. Well, he ran out, so we had to go to somebody else. And I've never tried this kid's stuff before. But I just said, fuck it, YOLO. Which should not have been my motto at the time. But it was. So that night, we're in the car, and one of our friends is driving because he's sober, obviously. And before I put the tab on my tongue, I started to get really nervous. And I have never felt like that before I've taken acid. But I kind of just said fuck it, and I put it on my tongue. So we go pick up 2 more people that I'm not really close with. So then we make our way over to our other friend's apartment. And I'm kind of feeling it, but not really. But then as soon as we walk into that apartment, I start tripping balls. And you know, everything was going good. But then my dumb ass decided to look in the fucking mirror. And as soon as I look in the mirror, I see myself smile back at me, like for part 2. Okay, part 2. So like I said, I look in the mirror and I see myself smiling back at me. And that's whenever everything went south so quick. I sat on the bed, tried to pull myself together because I didn't want to make a fucking scene in front of everybody. But then I got caught in this fucking loop. And if you don't know what the loop is, then I'm going to tell you what it is. It's basically where you feel like you're doing the same thing over and over and over again. And then I started looking around at everybody and it looked like their faces were melting. One of my friends got up off his chair, walked to the other side of the room, and I watched him do that. But when I looked back over at the fucking chair, he was still sitting there. So I looked at my one friend that was sober, who I was actually really close with, and I think he saw the look in my eye and he was like, "Do you want to leave now?" And I just shook my head, yeah, like I could not deal with that shit anymore. So we go to his car and then we drive to my boyfriend's house. Because I could not go home. I would have got crucified. Well, we get in the house and as soon as his mom sees me, she knows that something's wrong. Like for part 3.